How to build Michael's freight depot, a model railway building. Hi, I'm Chris, the modeller at ABR Modelworks, and welcome to our build video for Michael's freight depot. The detailed instructions that come with this kit are also in sync with this video and include timecode chapter markers for easy navigation. Those chapter markers are also in the details below. It allows the experienced modelers to skip ahead and the novice modelers to watch the building being built. I've also included some great tips and how-tos along the way. The instructions are broken up into three main areas: preparation, painting and assembly of the panels into the main structure, the 3D printed scenic detail parts, and then bringing them all together to finish the building. You can save time on the building by working on both panels and 3D parts, jumping between them while waiting for paint and glue to dry. Now before we start, don't forget to subscribe and ring that little bell icon, as we'll be posting updates and how-to videos on the modular model building system that will help you with this build and others. And as always, we welcome your questions and feedback, so please leave comments in the comment section below. Lastly, as this is one of our first kit build videos, it's not as polished as I'd like, so please forgive me. I will try and do better. Steven Spielberg, I'm not. So the first step is to sand the surface of all of the panels. Now for health reasons, one thing that you need to take into consideration whenever you're working with MDF is dust. Any timber or any dust is not good for your lungs, but particularly MDF, the glues are not particularly nice. Always do your sanding in a well ventilated area, the same as what you would do when you do your painting. So I've got my spray booth which has the filtration system outside, so we'll start that up, get some air circulating, and we'll start sanding all the panels. Now as this panel is going to be used on both sides and you'll see it, we'll also sand the back. So that panel is now ready to be broken out, but we'll do that afterwards. We'll keep going with the rest of the panels. So I'm now sanding the panels that go together for the base. Okay, so next I'm going to be sanding brick panels and the doors along with the platform pieces. Now because these pieces have brick engraved sections which we're going to be filling at a later point with Model Light to give you the mortar. The main reason why we need to give this a good sand is to remove the glue that's now stuck to the surface in the laser cutting process. If we don't give that a good clean, when the mortar is applied, it will dissolve the glue and make the grout turn a creamy colour. All of the platform panels and floors, everything else, we always sand them while they're inside their frame. That way you won't damage them. So we now have all of our panels, platforms and floors, roofs sanded. Each panel comes with a set of spacers. A bottom spacer for the bottom floor, a middle spacer for any floors above the bottom floor, and the top spacer is for the roof spacing on the top. In addition to that, there are spacers that go between the floors. Now in this build we're not going to use this section. The next step is to break them out of their holding frames and get them ready for assembly. So simply pop them out, and then popping from the back, just find the little spot where the tabs are. You'll feel it as you start to put a little bit of pressure on, and just very carefully pop them out of the frame. Now at this stage you need to be a little careful because this line here is actually cut through and there's some just holding tabs holding it together, and the same with the top section. We're going to pour a little bit of glue into those just to give them a little bit of extra strength because we actually want to keep them. The other part that you break off at this stage is the side tabs, but now we've removed those, we can slot panels together. Okay, there's the panels now done, and I'm going to do the same for the platform pieces as well. Now on the platform pieces, the brick sections, there's these little corner pieces that need to be broken off. It's a good idea to make sure that when you separate the platforms that we keep the pieces for the brick sections separate for the corner ones than for the straight sections. Now this top section here is a little set of steps, so at this point we don't need the top bit, but we will break out the brick section. So next we'll break out all of the brick panels for the inserts to the panels and the roller doors. Now with the roller doors you need to be a little bit careful because there is a little section on the side that can come away. The reason why that's there is that we may have the roller door open. You can break it away to take that section of the door out, which we will do on this particular build. You'll notice that the engraving is slightly heavier on the front side than the back side. This is for two reasons. One, because you can see it, you want the grout to look really good on the front. Secondly, we don't want to cut too deeply into the material, otherwise these pieces will break away, but you do need to be very careful with them because they can break. This piece here is the internal wall. Now you may have noticed that I've got a piece of galvanized iron. The reason why I use that, I like to use magnets to hold things together while they're drying. So I start by getting a 2-foot rule or a 600mm ruler, 3 or 4 magnets to hold it in place. So I've now got a nice straight edge and what we do next is take an emery board or a file and we clean these little tabs up. Just make sure you hold it to support it carefully. Give each of those areas and the sides a light sand, just enough to remove the little tabs that are holding it. Now these corner pieces also have a tab in them, and so they need to be sanded as well. And while I'm doing it, I'll also give the inside a light sand to get rid of that tab. The next thing what we want to do is make sure that they slot together. So our building has 2 openings on the front wall like so, and they come together quite nicely, so there's not much that needs to be done. Now sometimes you might find that you may need to just adjust the tabs just a little bit to get them to line up and be flat along the bottom. So now this is what the straight edge is for. What we want is the bottom edge to be nice and flat. That's the front wall. That looks like it's going to be fine. This panel is going to go as an end panel, so we might as well check to make sure it's going to fit on the front wall. That does, no problem. The other one is going to go at the other end, so this is not quite slotting together, so we need a little bit of a sand. So 2 end walls and the 3 front panels. That works out perfect. Slide that away and I'm going to reverse these. So our back wall and 2 end walls. So now they all line up nicely and we'll be able to glue them together. One of the issues is that sheets of MDF do vary slightly in thickness. So although we've got the panels the top side up, what we're actually going to do is we're going to roll them over and glue them together face down. Now what that will do is if there is a slight discrepancy in the thickness of the material, then the front face will be flat and the discrepancy will be on the back. So using our speed bond glue and the applicator, we just put a small bead of glue along the top edge like so. Push it together, making sure that it lines up at the bottom, and just with your finger wipe away any excess. You don't need a lot of glue. It's surprising how strong this will be. It takes about 10 minutes to dry. As you can see, glued together, quite strong, supports itself quite well. Now, just to reinforce it a little bit, we're going to take our glue and using the end, we're just going to force just a little bit of glue into the joint line. We're also going to force a little bit of glue along the roof joint line. The end on this works for this job really nicely. This will give that probably about half an hour now to dry. And we'll give our panels, oops, let's get the air going, and give our panels just a very light sand as well. I did push a little bit of glue into the backside as well, and the main reason why I do that is that now acts as a little bit of a filler, so that when we paint it, the lines aren't going to be quite as obvious. It's not that critical because of course it's going to be on the inside of the building, but this building has over 100 3D parts, so there's lots of pallets and 44-gallon drums and crates and things like that you're going to put inside the doorways, so you're going to see the walls, so we do want to paint the inside of the walls. Okay, so next we're going to glue the floor and roof supports in place. What we've done is we've made these in such a way that they do two jobs. They actually support the floor or roof like so, but they also add strength to the top. And where they overlap, they actually overlap the joint and add some strength to the joint where the panels butt together. You'll note there's two ends to them that can be broken away. And the reason for that is that panels are 3 inches wide, or 76 millimeters, but the overall length has an extra 3 mil. When you add panels to the ends, the distance inside is shorter as well. So what we do to make that system work, from the left-hand end, we take the roof support as an example, and we place it like so, and you can see it's covering over that joint at that point. It lines up, the bottom of it lines up with the top of the opening, which is either going to be a brick insert or a window. Then you butt this one up against that, which covers the next joint. And then here, we're now too long because the wall on the end is going to hit that. So what we do is we snap off that section, and we now have it lining up perfectly. Even though I'm holding it a little bit crooked, you get the idea. Now, it's important that the base lines up at the bottom, because there has to be the right height so that when the door opening and the wall sits together, the floor and the doorway is at the right height. Now, the other part to this process is it needs to be 3 mil in from the end, and there's a couple of ways you can do that, but one of the ways, which is not a bad idea, is to actually use the end wall as a spacer. So if we take a couple of magnets, we put our end wall in place up against there like so, the other magnet like that, line it up so that it's nice and straight. Take our bottom piece, put a small bead of glue along the bottom and a little bit on the end. Before we do that, a magnet to put along the bottom edge so that you've got something to align those strips up with. And get all that nice and aligned so it's nice and flat, and then slide that piece in like so. Check to make sure it's lined up at the bottom and there's not hanging down. Hold it for a moment and repeat the process. So add a little bit of glue and you can see it now lines up nicely with the end, and basically we're going to do the same thing. So that's it. They're the supports now for the roof and for the floor on the back wall. So I'll stop here, I'll go ahead and do the other wall and get it to the point where we're doing the ends, and I'll come back. So we've now got all of our parts ready for undercoating. The first stage that we do, because we're using MDF and MDF soaks up the paint a lot, I've mixed up a brew of 50% water and 50% speed bond. I've added a little bit of Vallejo grey primer. This will seal the wood and stop the paint soaking in as much. So what we'll be doing, we're going to put a very thin coat on, let it dry, give it a very light sand just to knock back any high spots, dust. Give it a second coat, do the same thing, quick little knockback, and then we'll be spraying the various pieces with some of the Vallejo hobby paints. The bottom of the ground is not going to be painted. I am going to seal it. A little bit of time to dry. Okay, so I'll go ahead now, I'll finish all of the first coat. To get nice looking mortar joints on the brick panels, you need to seal them first the same way as we seal the rest of the MDF, and then undercoat them. When you look at concrete and bitumen and surfaces in general, the actual surface is made up of lots of little pieces that are all different colours. In the same way, a laser printer that has 4 colours joins all those little dots together to form a colour photograph. By having a painted surface and then adding a mist coat to it, we'll start to produce that type of effect. So I'm going to give that a go with this particular piece and with the walls and platforms, so that the concrete is all painted the same. So we'll start with this. Very lightly start applying some colour. We don't want to do it too heavy. We're not trying to paint it in one go. Excellent. Alright, so I'm going to put that off to one side, let it dry up a little bit. And the inside of the walls first. Last of all, the roof. So now we're going to paint the brick panels. And I'm going to use the Vallejo Glory Red. Panels that are going to be painted on both sides, I've got those laid up first. And off to the side, I have the small panels for the platform. Now they're only painted on one side, so we'll do those ones last. But by doing these first and the roller doors, I can place them off to one side, and by the time I get through, I should be able to go back and give the back of those a quick coat as well. Remembering that this is an undercoat, so again we're just misting it on. The next phase will be to paint on a more brick looking colour. So there we go, first one done. Okay, so I have all those painted and we'll let those sit and dry. Okay, so I'm ready now to paint the inside of the building, and at the same time we'll do the platforms, the roof and floor. So the first thing I need to do is mix up paint to the colour that I'm looking for. Okay, so I've got a couple of little containers here that I'm going to mix my paint in. So the two colours I'm going to be working with, the Vallejo Surface Primer Ghost Grey and Israel Sand. Now I'm going to make about 3/4 of that container full of paint, which I'll then thin down for the spray painting. Sort of looking for a bit of a dirty grey that's a little bit on the warm side. Okay, let's get cracking. Again, we're just misting at this stage. We don't want to put too much paint on. We're looking to get those areas where the windows are going to be. Now, the bottom section is under the floor, so you don't see that, so I'm not particularly bothered about that. What I'm really trying to get coverage on is the very top where the wall will protrude from the roof. This section that'll be visible inside, and these centre and end pieces, and at the same time getting some paint in underneath around the openings, etc. Now, it might be appearing fairly spotty to you, but as I said earlier, concrete, bitumen, etc. is made up of layers of different stones, sand, and we're painting like this, we're going to get that sort of build-up. Now, the edges of the roof floor won't be seen, so I don't need to be particularly fussy about giving them a good coat. And again, the same with the base. So I've now got all of my pieces coated and the inside walls done. So we now have all of the building parts undercoated, ready for the next stage. The next task is to paint actual brick colour. This at the moment is just an undercoat to help seal it. And I've mixed in this container the original German red that was there, and I've put about 10% or thereabouts of Israel sand in the container and then given a thorough mixing. That's going to be our brick colour. Now it'll be a little bit dark and bright, but that'll be okay because when we put the model light on to fill in the little grooves for the mortar, that will knock that colour back a little bit. First job is to give these pieces a nice coat and put them aside and let them dry, and they need to be thoroughly dry. They need at least 24 hours so that when you put the model light on they don't dissolve the paint and change the colour of the model light. So I've got a couple of sheets of plastic to work on and to let them dry on. This is a sort of scrubbing action. We want to make sure it gets down inside. Now the coverage doesn't have to be absolutely perfect because you do get a variety of brick colours, and what you should do is have a look on Google for some photos of brick walls and buildings to get a feel for the colour that you're looking for and the final finish. All got the first coat on. Of course the walls and the brick insert sections will need to have the other side coated, so we'll give those 15-20 minutes or so to dry up enough to the point they can be handled, and then we'll put the whole lot off to one side and we'll come back in around 24 hours or so to do the next stage. Now at the point where we're going to start to look at gluing this together, and the first thing I always do is just make sure that all the joints lined up properly. So there's a little bit of cleaning up to do because there's probably some paint stopping it from sitting in absolutely right. So we'll pull it apart and carefully go around and just make sure there's nothing stopping it from sliding together nicely. Try not to get any excess glue on the inside because you may see that afterwards. But on the outside it doesn't matter because we're going to be putting pilasters over those corners which will hide the joint, so we're not that worried about them. So we'll start by getting some glue, and you need to be, you've got a bit of working time, but you need to be just on top of it. So we're just going to put it on the edge furthest away and the glue will squeeze in. So on the outside edge we'll get that one. We'll do the same to the other end. You don't need a lot of glue for the floor, just a couple of dabs. It really isn't going to go anywhere. Just making sure that still all fits together properly. Yep. And then last of all, we're going to put this one on. Same thing, a little bit of glue on the edge that's going to be towards the outside of the corner. Now of course the outside's not painted at this stage. The inside has our grey colour, or should I say has our concrete grey colour. Hang on. Quickly get a lacquey on just to hold everything where it should be. Tighter it's squeezed together to a degree, the more pressure that's put on those corner joints, the more it tries to force the glue out, the stronger it will be once the glue dries up. So bunch of lacqueys. And the last thing we do is we'll take a skewer, clean the end off. There's a little tiny bit of glue on that corner, a little tiny bit of glue just on the floor down there. Okay, there we have it, all together nicely. A little bit of glue on the outside, doesn't matter because like I say, we're going to just give the corners a light sanding and then glue the pilasters on. Okay, so now while that's drying up, I'm just going to take a whisker off each end of the roof so that it drops in nicely. On this model I'm going to make it so that the roof is optional to have it removable. Two reasons: one, so you can see all the details we're going to stick inside, and two, in this build right now I'm not putting lighting in it, but I'll probably do that in the future. Our next job is to put the pilasters on. And there's just a couple of little things to take into account for this. First of all, we're wrapping a platform around the front. So the pilaster has to stop at the top of that line. But I'm going to glue it on, but the glue will stop above, and I'm going to leave the pilaster hanging down, and then when the platform is made, slide up against and be able to scribe a line so that I can cut it off so it's nice and square. So now on the pilaster sheet you have some 5 width and some 4 width pilasters. The 5 width pilasters go on the front face because they hang over the end, and the 4 go on the ends to hide behind it. We use a little bit of model light to disguise that. And then there's 4 to go into the corners, 2 end pieces and 2 straight pieces to meet up in the middle. So we'll start by cutting them out and applying them. What you do is we take a 4 width pilaster, which is going to sit there, take our speed bond glue and just very lightly put some glue along the edge. This back line is there as a little bit of an alignment guide. Make sure that it lines up with the architectural line there. Roll him on his side, same thing, but this time we want a little bit of glue on the card, the pilaster card. We take a 5mm one. Now, too late, but I just realised I have made a little blunder, but it'll be okay, I'll be able to recover from the mistake. It'll be more messy if I try and fix it now. I'm wondering if anyone's picked up on it. Okay, So for those that are following along, what I said before was I'm going to stop the glue at this point. So on the front side, these bottom pieces are going to be cut away. I'll be able to cut it and just sand it off, so it's not a big deal, but I'm certainly not going to make that mistake twice. So 5mm one goes in the centre, using the guides to line it up, bit down, make sure it lines up with the lines running the other way. Okay, so they're on, nicely dry enough so that I can continue working. So now we'll just roll around and we'll do the two back corners in the middle section. Alright, next we'll put on the capping. So I start with the end ones. They get glued on so they're flush with the inside edge. That way the roof will come on and off easily. You just feel the back to make sure it's over the edge. You can line it up with the front edge with the vertical pilaster, and then when we've done that we'll put one going this way. You can see that we've just gone past the center point. That's okay. We've got some straight pieces that we'll cut afterwards to go in the middle. We've deliberately made those a little bit longer, and the reason for it is when you assemble the system, some people will sand the joints down a lot because that will shrink it up. Other people won't sand them at all, that'll expand it. To compensate for the length being, you know, that there's a small amount of variation most likely going to happen, we've built the system so that that can be accommodated for. Okay, so now we need to fit the two pieces to go into the gap in the middle, and if you do make a mistake and cut it too short, it's not a major problem because the model light will fill the gap in. I'll cut one too short right now just to show you what I mean. So there's quite a gap. So what I'll do is, rather than have a big gap at one end, I'll place it reasonably central. And we want all of those to be pressed for a little bit, so we'll roll it over, weights on the corner, get that nice and flat. Next, we're going to fill in these little gaps with Deluxe Materials Model Light. To apply it, it's really just a case of squeezing it in, but what you want to make sure you do is build it up gradually. In the first application, what we're trying to do is get some of the bonding agents to adhere to the surface, and then that way we can build it up if need be. So it won't take a lot to do what we want, but just rub it into the surface. Get it to bond. Okay, I'll just get a knife, cut that away. Some of these bits will come away just as easily with a knife afterwards, but these couple here are just a little bit large, and if I can get them away now, not as much work afterwards. Alright, that'll do for the moment. We'll let that dry up. So the model light has set up enough now that I can sand it back, another layer on if needed. So start in one corner and just very carefully, actually before you do that, just wipe your finger over all of the areas, because it'll knock off anything that's really loose. That way it won't go between the sanding block and gouge something. Starting on one end, gently with a circular motion, find those high spots and then knock them back. These pieces on the side, a knife, probably will find that they'll flake away. Gap on it, it's closed right up, so I'm just going to take my razor saw, very gently to a couple of gentle strokes. Okay, so let's get the model light and get it on. Again, don't forget to work it on the surface first, and then come back with a sort of a pinching motion, building the corner up. A little bit fiddly, but well worth doing it. Do a nice job of it, you'll end up with a nice looking corner. Just finish the building off so much. Our model light has dried up enough that we can give it a sand. So now we'll start on the ends, and I very gently sand, feeling for any high spots. We'll knock those back first because they'll catch on the sanding block. Let's get our air going. Okay, alright, well I'm happy with that. It's now ready to have the outside painted the concrete colour. Before you paint the cardboard pilasters and roof trim, it's a good idea to put a couple of coats of sealer on first, giving it a light sand and preparing it prior to the undercoat. We're ready now to start to put some final touches. We're going to first of all give a light mist of the card areas, and then we'll build that up. Let it dry before we finish it off. Air going on the spray booth. So I'll set that to one side now, give it a little while to dry up. I'll give it a light rub just to take away the furriness of it, and we'll give it another coat. Okay. I've now added the final coat to the building platform tops and the ground. So now we're going to apply some Deluxe Materials Model Light to our brick panels. When you have a look at a brick panel, you'll see that one side is got a deeper engraving. You can see that also looking on the end. So the deepest engraving is the outside of the building and the shallow is the inside of the building. So I suggest you start with the inside of the building first for two reasons. One, gives you a little bit of practice, and two, we're going to be rolling it over and we want the outside of the building to look the best. So if you make any mistakes on the inside while you're learning to do this, it's better to do it there than to do it on the outside. Now the other thing, and I cannot emphasize this enough, the paint must be thoroughly dry. So it needs a good 24 hours. It can't be tacky at all, because the minute you start putting the model light on, the glues and the solvents in this will make the paint also run, and then you'll end up with a soupy messy colour. You'll need a moist rag just to wipe your finger on occasionally. You need a couple of dry paper towels to wipe off the excess. So take a reasonable amount and just wipe it on. Don't scrub it. Just fill those mortar joints. Now you might be thinking that's too white. That doesn't look like mortar. But we're going to stain this afterwards. Then just wipe away any excess and then put off to one side to dry. Keep working your way through. Make sure we've got the back side. When you're doing these types of pieces, just be a little careful that we don't snap them. Keep a finger underneath where you're applying it. Now this process I think is fine for any sort of timber based engraved brick. Alright, now we'll work our way through the front side of all of these. Okay, so we're done. Now before the model light is completely dry, I like to just clean up the edges with a knife, just scraping away what's not required, because it's a lot easier to do it now than when it becomes hard. It's not really ever very hard. You can sand it easy, as you've seen, but nevertheless we just make the job easier for yourself. So clean up all the openings. Some of these will end up being sanded anyway because do the final fit of the windows. On the surface, there's a few spots that it's a little bit too thick. Tilt the blade so that the edge of the blade is parallel to the surface, and just plane away, and it'll just scrape the top off very gently. If you go too hard, you might take the top off a brick, but doing this part, you need to do it before it's dry. Now, this one has got a couple of spots where there's not quite enough mortar at the top there. You can either leave it, because sometimes mortar will fall out, so you can leave it as part of like a weathering effect, or you can add a little bit more of the model light to it and clean it up, which is what I'm going to do. So I'm just going to put that one to one side and I'll come back to that, and I'll continue on doing the same process to the rest of them. As a final part to prepping these for staining, we'll just give them a very little light rub just to remove most of what's on top of the bricks, but not all of it. Will help it stand out. Now you may not see this in the camera, but I'm now touching some of the paint, so it looks like it's staining the mortar joints in a red colour, but I dust that away, it's fine. Okay, so it's now time to apply a wash to get that cement look in our mortar joints, and I'm going to use Vallejo light grey wash for this process. Get a little bit out on our pallet here. I'll stick them on the metal part of the bench to dry, and just really quickly give them a good wipe over and move on to the next one. So we'll pour out a little bit more and do the wall sections next. These need to be done on both sides. Okay, so that's the walls done. So we're now at the stage where we're going to add bases to the platform. Our building is undercoated, ready for final painting, but we do need to trim the bottom of these pilasters where the platform sits in. So we need to get the platform put together to establish exactly that height. These sections slightly too long, and so when we've put the platform together, we'll put these three pieces together first. We'll put the base together for this one, but we won't glue it together, because once we've trimmed these, then we can sit the whole thing together and see exactly how much to remove. So I'm going to get the base pieces for the platforms organized. We're going to glue those together. I've got my platforms laid out with the brick panels that go underneath. underneath. I've set up a bunch of magnets to work as jigs, so gluing the corners together. It's now really a simple case of taking my speed bond glue, putting a little bit on the appropriate faces, putting it together, sliding it into the corner, getting a block, and there we go. Quick tidy up on the ends. Do both ends at this stage because you won't be able to do it when they're together. So the steel block does two things with the magnets. A, holds it while the glue dries, make sure that the corners are pushed in, and two, it's square. You have the two long ones, which obviously go on the outside, the two short ones go on the ends, and the two middle-sized ones go inside section. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to let that sit for about 5 minutes, let them dry. So carefully slide the metal away from the magnets, pop it off to one side, and then very carefully, because the joints still aren't really super strong, apply a little bit of glue at the end, push it together gently, push that off to one side. And what I'll do is I'll use the two pieces of metal just to, another one, push on the base, and we'll let that set up. These ones are a little more tricky, goes there like so. Then these two pieces glued in on the end. Put a little bit of glue very carefully. I'll use a piece of metal just to push against that wall, and then we'll do the same at the other end. So we're going to glue the brick base to the platform. And when you look at the brick base, there's a full brick and a half cut brick because of the height. So we put it with the full brick at the top. So simply roll it over, and we'll get our glue. We don't need a lot of glue, just a few little dobs, plenty. Okay, we get something heavy that's square, and then place it on the deck, just making sure that it lines up. So the back edge wants to be on the square, doesn't want to be protruding because then it'll push the deck away from the building. It doesn't matter if it's inside a little bit, but that's basically all we need to do. And so once that is dry, we'll cut the pilasters and then shave both ends of this down so that it fits neatly in that position. So we're now going to look at trimming the bottom of the pilasters so that the platforms butt up against the side of the building. I still have the platform that hasn't been finished, but I'm using the other one just as a reference for the height. So with a nice clean sharp blade, just very carefully scribe along where you're going to cut. Working from the top down, just shave away, take your time, work the bottom piece free, remove any high spots that the glue will have left. Same thing the other end. Now the next one we'll do is this one. The back one needs to have a little step in it. Make sure you sweep away any rubbish from your flat surface because things won't sit square and you won't really know whether you've got it right or not. So it's about half. So now with a ruler, just scribe a few strokes, take that end piece off. Be careful not to go too crazy and take the one piece off. Give it a little bit of sand afterwards and that'll get rid of the fur that's there. Okay, so that's good. And then same thing at this end. So, of course, this one is going to sit on the end, but you can see that we're about a 3/32 to not quite a mil. We'll take the sanding block and we'll just carefully take some off both ends. So we now have our platform finished. We take the insert, we lay it over the opening, and we have a look at where it needs to be sanded. So we just need to take a little bit off this edge, and these corners, the paint has just filled them a little bit, so a little bit of a sand. It doesn't matter at the moment if we get to the wood, which I have there, because A, this will cover it, and B, we are going to another coat of the grey. So I'll take my little sanding jig and just gently take a little bit off the edge. I'm putting it in the doorway end first, probably about right. I just need a whisker off the top. So that I'm sanding this edge and this edge because those two edges are nice and strong and will handle the sanding. If I sand that edge, I run the risk of breaking this, and that's reasonably flimsy. So we'll roll him over so the solid edge is up against the stop, and we'll just a few strokes, probably all it will need. Get that sharp edge away. So this is the door. I'll ride over to the back. It's probably a little easier to see. You can see that the laser has cut through, but there's a whole series of little tabs just holding it in place. So you've got a number of choices. You can break it out of the frame altogether and have the door completely open. You can break it out and get your razor saw and cut it in half or third or whatever you like, so it's partially open, or you can have it completely closed. But before you break it out and do that, what you need to do first is fit it, because while it's in this state, it's relatively strong, and these side pieces are going to be more protected when you're sanding the edges, because you may need to just take a little off both sides. Maybe not quite. Yeah, just a little bit. What's stopping it at the moment is just a little bit of paint in the corners, so we'll just get a square needle file, give that a little bit of a, just need a little bit off the sides and a little bit off the... Now if you make a mistake and you sand too much away and you end up with a gap, we'll be fitting these canopy glue because it dries absolutely clear. So you can put a little bit of a fillet with the canopy glue in there and just give it a touch of paint afterwards with a very fine brush. There we go. So there's a closed door. Now with the front one, I'm going to have it completely open and the side one half open. So pop this roller door back out very carefully, and the paint now will have made this a little bit awkward to pull apart. But okay, with a scalpel, I'm just going to very carefully run down that joint line, just cleaning out the paint. Do the same across the top. Slowly cut through the little tabs, and we want to do this carefully so we don't snap off the ends. Okay, so there we have fully open door. To make this really easy, choose the line you want to cut it through, and with the razor saw just start rolling backwards and forwards very gently, and that engraving line will give you a nice clean sharp cut through. Let the saw do the work, just very, hardly any pressure. Just let it, we'll cut it away, and there we have a nice clean straight line. We'll get our emery board, just give it a little light sand, take a bit off the edge, get any furry bits off the back. Remembering this is going to be painted, we'll take our roller door and we'll just knock back those tabs. Again, be very careful, and we'll glue that in there like so. A little dab of glue, putting it in on a little bit of an angle, set it down on the bench top and let that dry up. I've now fitted all of the panels. They're not glued in, they're just sitting there at the moment, but I thought I'd just put it together and show you where we're up to at this stage. Okay, so we've got the airbrush loaded with paint, we've got the booth running, and we're about to put what's hopefully going to be the final coat on the freight. So start with the back wall again. Now again, I'm misting it on. I'm not looking for that perfect finish. I'm now looking for colour coverage. But having that sort of orangey peel type, very, very fine look. Weathering powders and the other weathering techniques that we will use will bond to it nicely. Okay, very happy with that. I'm starting the weathering process on the concrete. I've got some Vallejo model colour smoke, mixed it up quite watery, and I'm spraying it from a big distance. So just misting this dirt onto the surface of the concrete. No particular pattern, just not sure whether you guys will see it in the video, but just to start, just a little bit of a breaking that consistency of the grey up, which I didn't apply evenly anyway. So each of the platform pieces are getting the same treatment. So the last thing we do is just test fit each of the pieces to make sure we've got them for the right openings and you haven't mixed them up. Sometimes when you file things down, they'll be slightly smaller in one direction, and if you mix them up you might find that you've got a long piece that doesn't quite fit and a short piece that's too loose. So just double check that before we start to glue. And these larger windows need to be sanded on the edges so that they'll fit their opening. Okay, so you need to support it nice and carefully as you're filing it backwards and forwards and keep it straight up and down. I usually hold it both ends in the middle, that way you end up with a flatter surface. Otherwise, if you just hold it in the middle, it'll bow and you'll end up with a scallop. And just keep going down until it slides in with a little bit of friction. You don't want it to be too tight. If it's too tight when you're putting it in, you'll bow the window frame. Okay, so I have checked all the other parts. They're all correct and they all fit. I've got one door sitting in there which I haven't glued in place. Like I said before, I'm going to glue in now the straight brick panels, the windows and the brick panels that have windows and doors in. I'm going to put those in place, but only as a friction fit for the moment. I am going to glue the windows and doors into the brick panels, and then that way doors, the windows, the side of it, everything gets a mist of this grime that we're going to be spraying onto the side of the building. The glue that I'm going to use is the Deluxe Materials RC Modelers Canopy Glue. This glue dries absolutely clear, so it's a really good glue for doing this, because if you do make a small mistake with it, it's clear. You can wipe it away with your finger or a damp cloth, so you want to have that available. I'm using a syringe also supplied by Deluxe Materials, so your hobby shop should have that. Little shot glass here with a sponge, some water in it, so that the syringe doesn't clog up. So I'm just going to use the syringe and just very gently in a couple of spots put a little bit of glue, really in the top corners, and that should be fine. Those couple of little marks glue will, as I say, dry nice and clear. Now I have pushed that in so that the back face is flush with the inside. Now with the brick parts, so because it's solid and you can hold it easy, it is fine to run your bead of glue just on the surface. As you can see, I've been able to apply a very thin line of glue. I'm just going to pick it out of the corner with a skewer. Double check to make sure it's exactly where you want it, and there we go. So off camera I will go ahead and finish placing all of those in. The brick panels are all glued in except for the ones that have the doors and the windows in, but that's all done. The roller doors all ready to go. So the next job is glue the platform down, then spray some weathering on. So it's getting close. But I've stopped mounting up the platform for a moment because I just want to show you a quick little tip. I've got my baseboard on the bench and I've got some, I think this is Pico Code 70 rail, and what I've done is I just placed it near it to look at the distance for the platform. Now I don't have the RMA gauge, which is really what I should be using to judge that distance. So what I'll do instead is I'll just run my wagon up to it, and that's enough clearance for me. I'll measure not for the rail but the edge of the ground to the edge of that's a 1/4 inch, 6 mil. Okay, what I'll do next is I'll mark the end of the platform, both ends. I'll put a mark in the center, and I'm going to get some masking tape, place it on the bench, just line up first line, the second and last line carefully, and then that should give me something to push the platform up against, just to give us a working guide as to where it needs to go when we're gluing it down. The first two have got to be right, and then after that what you want to do is you want to be checking to make sure the platform itself is correct. Eyeball down it, make sure that's okay, just very carefully. Yep, that's going to be right. Now, I didn't place it all the way in because I know it's going to move. So we'll tear our tape off and start by putting a few dobs of glue. Put some weight on it. Do the same thing to the next piece. You could have done also is laid a ruler down. You could put a few more pencil marks on there to line it up with. Many ways of doing it. The key point is that we get it parallel with this front face and nice and square, etc. And then just before the glue really completely sets up, we'll just drop him in to do a final sanity check. there we have it. So I'll leave that to dry a little bit so that I can handle it, and then we'll spray some overspray on there that will give it that weathered look. And as you do that, you'll find that that lovely smooth surface that you've been working so hard to get right will become all frosted and a little bit sandpapery. But that's real life. So we're now ready to apply some mist coats around the building to build up a little bit of grime. And I'm going to use 4 colours. They're all Model Air colours from Vallejo. So sand yellow, concrete, burnt umber and dark sea grey. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a couple of drops of each colour, one at a time. So how I'm going to do this is starting from the lightest shade. I'll put a few drops of paint and some thinner in the airbrush, mist that on. I'm not going to clean the airbrush. I'll go to the next darkest and so on and so forth until I've done the weathering pattern that I'm looking for. So let's get ourselves up and running. So that's our sand yellow. We're now going concrete. Now we're going to be focusing a little bit lower down, darker colours. So with the concrete and the burnt umber together, it's quite a muddy colour. And now we want to make sure we're quite a way away. We're just now really wanting to mist. If you get carried away and you go a little bit too far, then pop the building away and then just have another go with a little bit of the grey again, lighten it back off. So when we put a few tyre tracks on and we dust a little bit of the dusting pigments on and weathering powders, etc., that will look quite nice. Now on your pilaster sheet there is a little cardboard window. Your knife, trim that out. It's an internal window that needs to be fitted. Now I don't spray this, I'm just going to paint it with the black undercoat, but the most important part about fitting this is that if you try and push it in, you'll crush the window. So you really have to sand the opening so that it just goes in. I usually sand the top of it because I've done all the painting. That's easier to touch up without someone seeing the fact that you've hand painted. We'll give that a little lick with some black paint. Okay, so I've painted that and get it ready for putting inside our freight terminal. So the next part I'm going to work on is the 3D parts. So the first thing I like to do is sort all of the parts into their various types. So I'm going to go ahead and organise all my parts. Okay, I've sorted out all of the 3D components. Quite a range of different products. There's over 100 different 3D parts. A good range of 3D parts like this really sets the scene, so it's well worth the time carefully painting. I now have my bench set up with everything I need to start preparing the 3D printed detail parts, and I've sorted them into groups for the undercoat. So I'm going to be using Israel Sand, Ghost Grey, Grey, Black and German Red Brown. Next we're going to cut the 3D parts away from their sprues. So I'll be showing you how I do that and talking a little bit about technique as I go. When you're cutting, you want the flat side of the sprue cutter towards the model, because that pushes the sprue away. It doesn't put as much pressure on part, and therefore you've less chance of breaking it. Now in some cases, like I just did, you might need to cut some of the sprue away to get to joints that are behind that you can't quite get to. And there we go. I like to just sand off the sprue joints simply by placing it on a flat surface, giving it a quick rub, wiping it over, that's good. Taking a square needle file, doing the sides, which is where it's going to go into the wooden frame, and there you have it. Very carefully with the base. You don't want a rocking motion, otherwise you'll spoil it. You want to be nice and upright, and just gently backwards and forwards. Now we're going to put a dab of glue on that, place it up, or rather we're going to put a little dab of glue on our bamboo. Don't need a lot. There we go, first one done. Gluing your parts onto a skewer makes it very easy to paint, as you'll see later on in the video. So next I'll do 4 windows. Now these connect on the lip, and so you just work your way around, taking it away on the lip and the corner. There we go, broke off by itself. File the lip back and place it just there like so. Little dab of glue, push the two together. Okay, so next we're going to cut away the oil tank. It's got a little tap. You just need to be very careful that you just snip it very gently. There's two parts, one on the end of it and one underneath the tap. So you cut the underneath the tap bit away first and then slowly work your way down that sprue. So I don't know whether you can see it or not, but there's a gap there now. That way, when we cut the next bit at the back and do the same thing, trimming it back and removing that, giving it a little bit of a gap. Now you should be able to see the gap. There's no pressure on the tap. And I'll just even take that a little bit further away and start to remove it from the base. The base, we just slowly work our way round, gently snipping just underneath or the top of the sprue and supporting it as you go, and then just trim away the sprue so that you're just slowly relieving the tension on it so that it doesn't break. Now on the feet there'll be a little bit of cleanup required, and then very carefully put on the emery board and just very gently keep running it backwards and forwards until you've got a nice flat piece. Alright, and this one, there's a hole in the bottom, one of the pointy skewers, put a little bit of glue on if you like. We have our little air compressor. Now this has got a lot of little fine sprues connecting the cylinders to the top of the compressor, and they just break away really easily, so just get in there and just give them a bit of a haircut, trimming them back. If you can't quite do it, your cutters, get your knife and just break them off. Right, and then when you've done that, gently, don't have to necessarily cut all the way through, just what we're trying to do is break it enough the tension is not there when you're cutting another one, and then that way, because it's partially cut through, the chances are it'll just fall away. Okay, there's one in there, and there we have it. Same thing, there'll be a few little extra bits, just need a little bit of a tidy up. These will be noticeable. So take a file and just file those back. This set a bin and bin lid that's empty, so you can see inside it, which is pretty cool. So the bin lid is very thin, and so you do need to be quite careful when you snip it, so just very gently, a little bit of a pimple left behind. Now what we will be doing with the lid, and we'll do the same thing for the bin, is we'll take one of our modeller's racks, a couple of our skewers, and we're going to stand the skewer up on the end like so. More for the bin lid. So we'll roll the bin lid over. You'll notice it's got a handle on it, so it won't quite sit flat, but it will sit flat enough for this purpose. I'll take our glue. Now the bin could have been laid up on the top the same as the other, but the lid, unfortunately, it would be problematic trying to make that work. So doing it this way is by far the easiest. Now we have a rubbish bin with a lid partially on, and not quite sure whether you can see that, but there's rubbish in there, and so the lid is actually sitting on the rubbish. So again, with this one, we want to be starting at the top, just very gently working your way around the back of the bin, and then we'll just take those three parts off. It'll cut away from the bottom really easily. So we'll start by taking our nippers and just cleaning up the back, and then we'll take our file and just very carefully take the tops off where the sprues were attaching at the back. Pop it up on our rack. Okay, so we're going to do the pallets, and these are fairly quick and easy. I'll snip them all away, and then we'll set them up for gluing. Same as a lot of the parts, you just work your way around, put to one side, move on to the next one. If you haven't done a lot of this sort of thing where you're working with your hands filing, and over a period of time you'll develop a feel that will allow you to know almost without looking that you've done the job. All I'm trying to do is knock away the little proud parts where the sprues were connected. So when I first start, there's a little bit of resistance and then it runs smoothly. As soon as it goes smooth, I'm down to the point where I've got a flat surface. Get our glue, get a dab on there, and just rest it on top. We have two little hand trolleys. These are a little bit fiddly. Start at the top, remove that one just very gently. Same with the two on the sides. Now you can snip those away, and then each wheel, and then finally snip away at the base. Now there's one at the back here to remove to get in there. And there we have it. We'll get a little needle file in a minute and tidy that one up. Next we have our wheelbarrow, and again we'll just take off the legs very carefully so you don't break the legs away. Then we'll take side pieces to the wheels where the axle is, and lastly the wheel itself. Grab a little square file, just flatten off the bottom and just get into the back of it a little bit where the sprues are on the cross part. With the pulleys, you just need it again a little bit because there are some protruding bolts, so you need to be careful that we don't remove those. And unfortunately the sprue had to touch those. The base plate, it needs to be flat. As you do it, turn it around a little bit, and then that way you end up flat without a curve or taking too much off one side. Okay, now that brings us to our crane. Now we'll go over the crane very carefully and try and remove down to the surface as much as we possibly can. Now unfortunately the 3D printing process on this backside just never gets it absolutely flat. And what I like to use to solve those types of problems is a file. Hold it nice and flat and just very gently and very slowly work it backwards and forwards, and it will slowly take the high spots off. Now this side is a little bit more problematic because of the end. We need to do this on a bit of an angle. Very carefully take the high spots back as much as you can, going from one side to the other, and then finally, while holding it, very carefully run the file backwards and forwards. Keep doing it until you get a nice flat surface. There we go. That will do the job. Because we haven't completely done the top, we'll just very lightly, in a little bit of a circular motion, just blend the two in. Perfect. So I've just got some strips of MDF that's left cut-offs. I've put a piece of masking tape sticky side up with some masking tape on the ends and in the middle to hold it in place. And we're just going to put a few pieces on like so. So now that makes it very easy to spray and handle. So we'll just put that off to one side. Now the awnings, you need to be a little careful when we cut them away. Now with this you want to be quite careful, remove as much of where the sprue connected as possible, as we do have to sand this flat and you don't want to be doing it on too much of an angle. Okay, so with this we try and put our fingers around the brackets so that they have some support, and you just very gently run backwards and forwards, not too fast, you don't want it to catch. It'll take a few passes to get that nice and flat. Take your time, don't put a lot of pressure on it, let the grit on the nail file remove it, and I can still both hear and feel that we haven't got it to a flat surface, but we're getting close. We're looking for, yep, so now that's nice and flush. Yep, sits up beautifully. Okay, now to paint this, we just simply place it on there like so, and that gives us again nice working area. So I now have all of my 3D parts glued onto skewers or taped onto painting boards, ready for priming, all sorted in their various colours so that I can set up a simple little production run of moving from one part to the other, spraying them, and then moving on to the next colour and working my way through those. Now I've got all of the parts ready to go, and I have a spare rack off to the side, so as I go I will spray them and put them in the rack. So we're not trying to completely cover at this stage. This is just a very light misting coat first up. Drop it in the rack, grab the next part. As you can see, putting it on the skewer makes it really easy to handle. Start to see some of the detail coming out. If you go too heavy, you'll end up with run, and that will destroy the look because you'll fill in some of the detail area. So I'm now going to be painting these 3D parts with Vallejo German red brown. Just a light mist. Mistakes that people often make, and I've made it many times myself, is that you'll miss a tiny little spot, you'll hit it again, and then you've got to run. So you need to be a little bit patient, put on a couple of coats, build it up slowly, and with that you'll get a nicely painted, nicely finished model. I'm going to paint these awnings, and they are a corrugated iron awning with a frame underneath. The frame I will be painting by hand as a second exercise, but I'm going to paint these with the Vallejo oily steel. To me, this colour looks like it's been in the weather for a while. It's not super old, it hasn't started to rust or anything like that, although in this case we're going to simulate the bolt holes and things like that that are rusting, but it has that sort of dark aged look, so we're going to use that as our base colour. So again, we're just going to mist up to start with. Now with surfaces like corrugated iron, you want to hit it from a couple of different angles so that you're getting into the ridges. So I'm going to continue on now with applying the silver. I'm not quite sure whether you'll see this or not, but here's a tip on making the bin stand out, the little ribs on the bin stand out, the handles, etc. I've made not really a wash. I want the paint to be heavy enough to stick inside those grooves, but at the same time I want to be able to wipe it away, so it goes on wet. Not trying to necessarily give it a really good thick coverage, but I just want it on the bin. And then once you've got it like that and it's wet, take a damp cloth and roll the bin along it, just dabbing it, not too much because you don't want to take the paint out of the grooves. And now what you've got is a bin that all the lines and the grooves stand out, and it's got a little bit of grimy black about it. So there's a little painting tip. There's lots of ways of doing things like this, but that's just one. So here's a little painting tip for painting detail parts like this awning with the little frames underneath. Let me just get that focused. I'm using Vallejo surface primer, the German red brown, because it's a very similar colour to a lot of industrial paints that are used for stopping steel from rust. I'm painting with a number 2 of nice fine tip paintbrush, using some of my mixture, the Vallejo thinner and airbrush improver, and I've got a smaller tip brush, a number 0, that's got some of that formula on it, waiting for when I make a mistake, because when you're painting something fine like that, unless you've got brain surgery hands, which I certainly don't, you'll make a mistake. Let's do one and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Load the brush up a little bit, apply it somewhere else first, not using the tip, just using the side a little bit, and then to do this edge inside there, just gently find the spot and run your brush along the edge. Almost perfect. Now the idea is that if you don't and it comes off to the side, then you can use the other brush to wipe it away. So if I put just a little dab of paint there, using the thinner, let's just see if I can get this, not sure if that's coming up, but then just using the thinner you can just wipe it away. It becomes a little stain, but that's okay, and especially underneath, you're not going to see it, but at least you've got rid of the ugly mess. So that's what I do. I have that one sitting primed, ready to go. Okay, so I'm ready now to start building the colours up on pallets, boxes, crates and cable drums. And so this process is much the same as all the others. I'm just going to be misting some colours on to give the item a variety of speckled colour to imitate timber and a bit of weathering at the same time. So we'll get started. A Vallejo natural wood grain, We're just doing very light coats, some more than others. Okay, so I've mixed up some mahogany. It's a Model Air, so it's a slightly thinner brew. I'm going to now mist that on very lightly, just to sort of have little speckles of grain and not. So I will go a little heavier on these because I want to just mist a little bit of natural wood back over. And of course I'm transferring them as I go from one to another, so I know where I'm up to. With the pallets, I let it mist across the surface. So I come down onto the pallet while rotating it, and I think that gives you a more natural looking colour. Again, I'm still using the mahogany at this stage, so these couple of colours that we've put onto the pallet and the boxes are starting to look really nice. So the angle that you apply the paint can make a difference, as well as the distance away, and of course how much you're putting on. So the building is largely complete, and we're now getting to the stage of adding those little details that bring it to life. But one of the last jobs to do is just make the windows a little bit dirty. And what I'm going to do is, from quite a distance, I'm going to spray a dirty sandy colour just as a mist. Okay, so then we'll let them dry, and then we'll be attaching them with the RC Modeler's canopy glue. Okay, so we're now going to fit the windows to the building. So we're using the RC Modeler's canopy glue. I have it loaded in a syringe, sitting in a sponge with some water to stop the syringe from drying out. Now these are special needle syringes that you can get at your local hobby shop. All I'm going to do is just very gently, and this is why you use the syringe, just put a few little dobs of glue in the little recess where the glass sits. Now this dries absolutely clear, so if you do make a little bit of a mistake and it's not a huge glob, you'll be fine. And we'll take our piece of glass, drop it in, pat it down into the glue. You might get a little bit of glue spreading out, but like I say, it dries clear, you really won't see it. So I'll put that to one side. Well, it dries clear at about 30 minutes. I think you'll probably find that after about 15 minutes handling will be fine. Okay, so we'll grab door glass, drop that there like so, a couple of little dobs of glue in the corners, that's all it takes. And then next, same thing, we'll take a little bit of canopy glue, run a line along where the window sits. We'll take our window, very carefully pop it into place, double checking that it's recessed an equal amount all the way around. Now, there's two ways you can do that. You can eyeball it, or you can push it through so that the back surface of the frame is level with the inside surface of the building itself. Now we'll do the same thing for our two doorways. Run a bead of canopy glue, push that into place. With the brick insets, I line them up with the back face, because that also lines up the base of the door with the front face. Okay, so there we go. We have glass. Hopefully we're getting a little bit of light reflection. Yep, where we are. So you can see that we've got it in place. So now I'm going to let the building sit for a little bit, just so they're dry, so that if I happen to knock them, I'm not knocking them against the glue and not noticing, and then having a window or a doorway skew it. So we'll just give that about half an hour to set up. So you can see that what I'm about to show you is out of sequence in the build and in the video. Unfortunately, in my haste to get to this stage, I completely forgot about mounting the signs. So that's what we're going to be doing next. So I suggest that you do it before we glue the building to the base and we put any of the 3D parts on, because it's a lot easier to handle the building and to get the signs on properly. So I'm going to go ahead now and prepare these signs and then glue them on. We'll have 3 signs, one at either end and one in the middle. So before we get going with our sign, just a couple of things about it. Just in case you decide you want to make your own. Not everybody's going to necessarily want to have Michael's Freight Depot. You may want to badge it with your favourite railway logo. So the paper is just standard 80 GSM paper, and it's printed on a laser printer. You could try using inkjet printers, but if you do, you need to test first to make sure that the inks don't run, because the gluing process could cause that. Okay, so let's get going with our first sign. What you want to do is very carefully cut right on the very edge of the black line, so that you're retaining the black line. And it's most important that you use a new blade with a very sharp tip, because you want a nice clean cut line. Now we supply you with extras just in case you make a mistake with one. So now once you've got your sign cut, the next step is to sand it down. And I'm using just a piece of 180 grit sandpaper, and all you do is work your way on the back of the paper, sanding away the paper to the point where it starts to become thin enough that you can almost see the toner or the ink through the paper itself. Now the technique is that you start from the center and work your way out on a long, or lengthwise on a long sign like this, because that way you don't damage the edges. Now you need to be careful that you don't go all the way through. However, in some situations that's a good weathered look. The sign is partially disappearing. With a clean edge of a new sponge, just give it a little bit of a glass wipe just to remove any high spots or bits that have balled up. Now I just use a mixture of about 50-50 white glue and water. Okay, so to get the sign exactly where you want it while everything is still dry, line it up. I'm using the back edge of the E and looking down through the center of the building on that line. Make sure you're happy that both ends equal distance, and then just lift one end up with the paintbrush, get a little bit of your diluted solution and paint on the wall, and then this smear it along, just dabbing it gently so you don't damage the sign, and then do the same to the other end. Just peel it back, and there we have it. A little bit of dust, weathering powder, there we have the sign. Now I'll go on and do the two on the other ends, but it's not a hard process to do. I now have everything laid out ready to go. I've got my glues, my knife, tools, everything ready for finishing the model off. The next step is to have a quick look across the model to see if there's any spots that need to be fixed up. And I know that inside, and although you won't probably see this afterwards, there's a couple of spots on the door and the windows. There's a little spot down here that just needs to be touched up. Anywhere that you might have damaged or missed a bit, it just needs to be cleaned up. It's now time to do that. Then when you've done that, okay, so things like windows that need to be touched up, those little details inside, etc. The way I like to work is I put a few drops of my thinning solution, a drop of the colour, and then take a very fine brush, just moisten it with the thinning solution, and then just pick up a little bit. And the idea of moistening it is so that it flows off the brush really nicely. Now, although you can't see what I'm doing, but I'm just very carefully cleaning up, and now mixing the two gives you the sort of the density of paint that you need, so you can go backwards and forwards so you're not having to do too many coats. Now although that's underneath, still going to touch it up, and there you go, not as obvious. I'm fairly, oh no, there's a couple here as well. So this is normal. If you're gluing them to skewers to paint, you're going to end up with some chips. So what I'm going to do next is off camera, I'm going to take all these pieces off and clean them up. Okay, so I've removed all of the 3D parts now from the skewers, placed a few of them roughly where I think they may end up. There's a few parts inside that you don't see at the moment, but I'll move the camera in a sec. I'm getting ready to start to look at where I want to place things. The only things I haven't done at the moment is the guardrails. Okay, so as you can see, we've now got a few parts just sitting inside. I've actually put the internal wall in for the office, so I'm going to start placing things permanently. Most of the parts don't need retouching. There's a couple of things that I'm not overly happy with, and there's a couple of things I want to add to. For example, the compressor. I don't like the red. It's too bright and orange, so I'm going to go with something a bit darker. But other than that, I'm fairly happy with most of it. So I may change my mind as I start putting things together, but you'll see that towards the end. The only other thing that a little bit of work to do is with these awnings. So I'm going to have a row of bolts with rust coming down off them. I'll show you how to do that. So right now I've got most of the 3D detail parts all glued onto the scene. One of the last jobs I need to do is put the awnings on. And what I want the awnings to have a little bit of a weathered look with some rust marks. So I'm going to show you the technique that I use to produce this result. It's pretty simple. You'll need a 6-inch ruler, a black felt tip pen, one that is used, so it's not putting out a lot of ink. And what I want to do is put black dot on the ridge of the tops of the corrugated iron, and that black dot will tell me where to put the paint afterwards, but it will also be seen. So you want to be nice and not too large and not too big, just enough for it to show up. So there's our first line of dots, and then I roll the ruler around the other way. Just happens to line up nicely for the other end. Do the same thing. Okay, so there I have both lines of black dots. Next, I'm going to use some Model Air by Vallejo, and it is rust. So it's a fairly dark. You want a little bit of thinner mix to wet the brush. It's more about dampening the brush. And then what you do is carefully load the brush up, get a dot of paint, and just touch it on each of the little black marks. Just not too much, but just enough, and work your way across. Doesn't matter that they're all slightly different in size. Doesn't matter if they're okay. So now when I've done that, I'm just going to hit it with the hairdryer. Make sure it's nice and dry. Then I'll place it on the metal for a few minutes to make sure that the plastic has cooled down. So we're now going to put the streaks on, and I'm using Vallejo Light Rust. It's a two-step process. We use a brush again to dab it on, but we dab on a good drop, only in a few spots, and then we wipe it away. So I go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then give it a wipe. If it's a little bit dry, put a little bit of thinner on it, and just hit it again, and then just work your way along. It needs to be a reasonable sized dot, because it's got to stay wet, and that's why you need to let it cool down if you're using a hairdryer. The process going, put your dots in place, some larger, some smaller, give it a wipe. Now most of the wipe will go into the valley of the corrugated iron, which of course would be the case, because the rust will run from the bolt on the top down into the valley and then down towards the gutter. And there you go. Not too hard to do, doesn't take a lot of time, but the effect looks really good. Now we'll spray a wash over this so that it dulls it down more. Okay, so now we're going to put the cable onto the crane. In the box of 3D parts you would have noticed there was a little piece of cord, and that's what we're going to use to represent the steel cable. So the first thing we need to do is just put a little bit of glue on the end to stiffen that up, and so we'll just spread a little bit on, give it a twist and let that dry up so it's nice and stiff. And we want to cut it on a slight angle, so when you're looking at it, the blade is really quite a steep angle. So cut through that little piece that we've glued off, so that now we've got a pointed end. On the crane you've got the winch handle and the top pulley, and under the top pulley there's a small hole. So the hole is not quite large enough, however, because that's tapered, with a small dab of glue you'll be able to just jam it in, and that's really all it needs. If you've got a pin vise and you want to drill out the hole a little bit larger, you can do that, but we're just going to now take another little dab of glue, put on the end, and just poke it into the hole like so. Then we'll let that dry for a few minutes, and then we'll start the threading process. So now add a little bit of glue onto the other end so that we're turning the thread into a little bit of a needle to poke it through the various parts. So now once the glue is dry enough that you can handle it, very carefully of course, we then take our pulley and we thread it through, then thread it through the top of the crane to about the height you want it to hang down. Okay, then take the cord and thread it through the winch. Then make sure you've got enough cord hanging down for the height that you're looking for. Pinch off the cord with your fingers so you don't lose that height. Then pass the cord through the barrel of the winch so that it looks like it's wrapped around. You may want some tweezers to help with this process. 2 or 3 times is enough. So when that's done, hold the cable with your finger on this side of the winch, pull the cable tight through the winch, and then using your syringe and some of the canopy glue, just put a little bit of glue in underneath. Again, because it dries clear, you won't notice it. So now the glue in the winch is dry, and the glue at the top of the crane is dry, what I'm going to do next is take a little bit of speed bond, put just a drop in the bottom of the tray, mix it with a tiny bit of water. So now what I want to do is apply this glue to the cable to stiffen it up. So I wipe the cable down all over. I also make sure that when I do it that there's a reasonable amount at bottom where the pulley is going to be, and then once you're happy that you've got the cable nice and damp, we're going to stretch that cable using a couple of weights so that the pulley looks like it's heavy and is hanging down like so. Try to get a reasonable amount of tension on it, and when that dries you'll have a nice looking cable. So the last thing is to place the crane back in the scene, and there we have it. And the final thing I'm going to do is add some weathering powders. I found this at a local hobby shop. It's a product by Scale Modelers Supply, weathering pigment, and this one is concrete dust. I've had a little bit of a play with it, and it actually looks like that grime that you get from tyre marks on concrete. So I'm going to apply a little bit of that and weather up where the trucks go. I just dab the brush in a little bit. I've worked out where my tyre marks need to be, and I'm just brushing backwards and forwards to brush it into the surface. Because the painting we've done has been sprayed at a distance, that has allowed little droplets to form in a texture that allows the pigments to bond to. So there you go. I'll do the same at the other end. Now at this end of the building, the trucks can back up in two different ways, so into the loading bay that way and into the crane this way. So we're going to have two sets of streaky marks. So that's now nicely weathered up. I'm also going to apply a little bit of their dust pigment, and I'm probably going to do that as a little bit of a mix of the weathering concrete, of the concrete pigment as well. Okay, so this is going to be sort of where the forklifts run. I'll just pop the roof out for a sec so I can get in and finish it on the inside as well. Yeah, the mix of these two actually works really good. Putting a little bit randomly out on the driveway as well, so a slightly lighter mix. And then the last thing, with a fairly dry brush with not a lot of powder on, we're just going to streak a little bit down on the signs just to dull them off a little bit. I'm not sure how well this will show up on the video. The white background is just a little bit too white for this environment. I've taken a little bit of the powders and dropped it down onto another board and mixing it up a little bit there, and then sort of getting most of it off the brush, because I just want just enough to make it look like, you know, the building has been sitting out there for a while and there's a bit of weather build up of dirt and what have you. When you look at nature and what goes on, it's not all the same colour, so by putting a little bit of both together we're getting that sort of grimy type look that's made up of colours. And just make sure you don't have a lot on the brush when you hit the signs. The signs just need to be a little bit dirty. So I'm very happy with the way this is turning out now. We've got some nice colour on the platform, so you'll see all of that in the photos. The last thing I'm going to do on this building is, I didn't put any oil stain on the little tank at the end here. I'll take a super fine brush. So this is fuel stains by Vallejo, and I'm just going to get just enough, spill some down the side of this tank. A bit on the ground around where that drum is, and it's very subtle, but it really adds to the effect. Okay, now other than putting our building into a diorama, I'm very happy. I think that's pretty much now done. Thanks for buying and building Michael's Freight Depot. I'd love to see some photos of your build and perhaps share them in the gallery with your permission. I hope you had as much fun and enjoyment building Michael's Freight Depot as I did. I'm Chris, the modeler at ABR Model Works. Thanks for watching and have a great day.